Hey guys, if you're watching this video, it's probably because you're about to lead a study on the book of John, and I'm excited for you. This little intro piece is just called On John. It's a little background to that study. Here's a painting of John that somebody painted back in the 17th century. Of course, we don't really know what John looked like, though a lot of people have tried to paint him, but believe it or not, we do know a lot about him. Perhaps the most important thing we know is that he was very close to Jesus Christ. People have said he was Jesus' best friend. Let me unpack that a little bit for you. He was, of course, one of the primary three. Peter, James, and John were the closest disciples to Jesus. He took them places he didn't take anyone else, and he told them things he didn't tell anyone else. John records most of those things in his gospel. For instance, he was present at the Transfiguration, and he saw Jesus in his glory. But even among the three, he was the closest one to Jesus in some ways. He describes himself as the apostle whom Jesus loved. And I think that's because he thought that it took a lot of grace and for Jesus to love him. But it's also because he did have a real good relationship with him. We see that, for instance, in that recording of the Last Supper. Jesus told him who would betray him. He told him about Judas before anyone else knew. This is how that story goes. They were in that upper room at that Last Supper when Jesus told his followers that one of them was going to betray him. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, was reclining next to Jesus at the time. And Simon Peter motioned to John and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, John asked him, he said, "Lord, who is it?" And Jesus answered him. He said, "It's the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I've dipped it in the dish." Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas. See, Peter knew that Jesus would tell John. And Jesus did. There are a lot of paintings of this supper, and you always see John leaning over on his friend Jesus. There. Here's another picture. It's a really good painting. This next one is a picture of Judas departing after Jesus gave him that piece of bread. If you look to the right, you see Satan about to enter Judas. And right in the center, of course, you see John leaning on Jesus. It's just always there. He's always pictured as having a close relationship with the Lord. Another reason that we see that, another place where we see that strong relationship is how Jesus entrusted his mother to John. Jesus was on the cross, and he desired that someone care for his mother after his death. And he grabbed his friend John. He said, "You take care of her." And John did. Of course, John was present at Peter's restoration as well. He was everywhere. He knew Jesus very well. He was incredibly close to him. And John is a heck of a biblical author. His gospel, the Gospel of John, is the most beloved book in the entire Bible. And every book of the Bible is fantastic, of course. And you can't overstate the importance of Genesis and Romans and such. But in terms of the most beloved book, it is the Gospel of John. John wrote 5 New Testament books in 3 genres. He's the only one to do that. He wrote, of course, the Gospel of John in 3 epistles, and he also wrote the book of Revelation. John's Gospel has something people has called a symphonic structure. People have called his Gospel a symphony. That is, it has all these majestic themes that come together, and they climax in this incredible way in the ending. It's a real neat piece of art. They've called him an artist because of the way he wrote. Here's one of my favorite paintings of the Gospel writers. There's Matthew, young Mark, Luke, and John. And you see John has the quill in his hand, and he's writing. He's thinking about how he's going to portray Jesus, how he's going to write about him. He has a real unique angle. See, each gospel is written with a particular audience in mind. Matthew wrote for a Jewish audience, and he presented Jesus as the coming Messiah, the King of the Jews, which he is. Mark presented him as the perfect servant, which of course he is. Luke presented him as the Son of Man. Luke has a lot of stories of Jesus and his interaction with children and women, Gentiles, people of all types, and he presents him as a Son of Man. He has all mankind in view. John presents Jesus as the Son of God. Matthew, for instance, in his genealogy, he starts with Abraham, the father of the Jews, because he's writing, presenting Jesus as the King of the Jews. Mark, with his quick pace, he just skips the genealogy altogether. Luke, as he's focusing on all humanity, traces Jesus' genealogy all the way back to Adam in the Garden of Eden. John doesn't have a genealogy at all. He has this exalted prologue. See, the Jews, the King of the Jews, walked on land. The perfect servant walked on land. The Son of Man, men walk on land. The Son of God flies. That's kind of the picture people have had. This is the beginning of that incredible work. It says, En arche ein halagos, kai halagos ein proston theon, kai theos ein halagos. That is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's an incredibly powerful beginning to an incredibly powerful book. And it flies. That's why every time someone casts a sculpture of John, they always cast that sculpture with an eagle. He always has his book, and there at his side there is an eagle, because John flies. Okay, so that's John's angle. Let's talk about the structure of the book of John real briefly. John has 21 chapters, and you can pretty much divide the book in half. John chapter 1 to 12 is one half, and John 13 to 21 is the second half. And the way we divide it, there's this issue that drives the division. John records how Jesus repeatedly said, "My hour has not yet come." But then at one point in his ministry, he said, "My hour has come." And he walked straight into Jerusalem to present himself to the nation and eventually be crucified and resurrected. That discussion of the hour comes up again and again, and it divides the book pretty evenly. And what's interesting, the first 12 chapters of John, that records about 3 years of Jesus' life. John 13 to 21 records only about 4 days. That last 8 chapters of the book focuses with real detail on that period of the hour, or the Passion, where Jesus died and resurrected. It's just a really, really fantastic story, of course, and John captures it in a real engaging way. That first book is often called the Book of Signs. These are the signs, or the miracles, recorded in chapters 1 to 12. Now, there are miracles recorded in chapters 13 to 21 as well, of course, the resurrection being the primary one. But this is called the Book of Signs, primarily because John records all these miracles that the other gospel writers didn't record. And we really enjoy that, so we call it the Book of Signs. The Book of the Hour, let me show you how that breaks out. In John chapter 2, verse 4, he said to his mom, "My hour has not yet come." And in various places, we see that his hour had not yet come. The author records that for us. But then in chapter 12, verse 23, we see that Jesus says, "The time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. The hour has come." And he repeats it and repeats it. That hour has begun. That's the second half of the book. That's how the book is divided. And let me also talk about 2 key themes in the book, too. The first theme I'll mention is how no one understands Jesus. Throughout the whole book, no one ever understands him. When he starts off in the temple and he says, "Destroy this structure and it'll rise again in 3 days," he was talking about his body, and the workers there thought he was talking about the physical temple. When he talked to Nicodemus later, he said, you got to be born again. Nicodemus thought he was talking about a physical birth. He wasn't talking about a physical birth. It goes on and on and on and on. That's a literary structure John uses. No one in the book understands him. And he challenges us. He asks us, do we understand him? How much do we know him? It's a fantastic angle. I love it so much. That's why I titled my Bible study on the book of John, I called it No One Understands Jesus. That's not the only theme, of course. You have this fantastic theme called the I Ams. This is the book where you see Jesus saying, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and I am the true vine. This is a rich study. I hope you're excited. I'm proud of you for diving into this book. You're joining a strong tradition. Let me read this quote to you from a guy named Irenaeus, who lived in the 2nd century. He records how he was discipled by a guy named Polycarp. He says, I remember the events of those days more clearly than those which have happened recently, for what we learn as children grows up with the soul and becomes united to it. So I can speak even of the place in which the blessed Polycarp sat and disputed, how he came in and went out, the character of his life, the appearance of his body, the discourse which he made to the people, how he reported his converse with John and with the others who had seen the Lord, how he remembered their words, and what were the things concerning the Lord which he had heard from them, including his miracles and his teaching, and how Polycarp had received from them those eyewitnesses of the word of life, and reported all things in agreement with the Scriptures. See, Irenaeus was discipled by a guy named Polycarp, and Polycarp was discipled by John. That's the strong tradition you're joining. You're being discipled by the book of John, and you're going to disciple others. Guys, this is the study you can find online. If you want to Google No One Understands Jesus, you can find it. It's a 12-week study in the Gospel of John. These videos are going to cover a little bit more. They're going to cover 23 weeks in the Gospel of John. And again, I'm excited for you. My name is Adam, and I couldn't be happier that you're joining us as you lead others to understand Jesus through His Word. Thanks, guys, for stepping up to leadership. I'll talk to you more later.